Well, good evening and welcome to Inside the Jim Shaughnessy Collection. My name is Haley Page, the Exhibition and Events Manager at the Center for Rural Photography and Art. And thank you for joining us for our final members-only program of 2023. These programs are a benefit of membership and a thank you to the great contributions members like you give the center to help us thrive. We really could not be more grateful. We are happy to provide these special sneak peeks into our collection as a heartfelt thank you to all of you. Now, we've been hosting these programs, these members-only events, since August 2022, and we now have 4 available for special viewing. We don't post these recordings publicly, so if you've missed any of the past presentations and would like to view them, just get in touch with us at our info account at info@railphoto-art.org. And before we get into tonight's presentation, I'd like to just take a few minutes to let you know what's all coming up for the center. Just a few quick housekeeping notes first. As a reminder, we use Zoom webinar for our presentations. So this means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or camera during the event, but you can change how you'd like to view your screen in that top right corner under that icon View. And at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of other icons. Please use the chat for any comments you have during the presentation. By selecting Everyone, like you see on the right, bottom right, you will ensure that the entire audience can see your comments. And please use that Q&A for any questions you have. Following the main presentation, we will be hosting a Q&A session. So if you have a question at any point during the presentation, just put that right there in the Q&A, not the chat, to make sure that we see it. Now, since everyone in this event is a member, I'll just briefly reference the center's programming and upcoming announcements. These are, of course, all of the programs that we offer to our members and beyond. Conversations is our annual conference, and we are excited to announce that our 2024 event will be once again hosted at Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois, on the weekend of June 14th to the 16th. We will open registrations next month, so keep an eye on our website and e-blast for initial details. We host a traveling exhibitions program, and our shows are featured all over the country. At the moment, we have our Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg exhibition on display at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, and a Milwaukee's Beer Line show is in an art center along the Beer Line Trail in Milwaukee. We host an annual photography contest called the John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards Program. The 2024 theme is Conveyance, and submissions are open now until May 1st. Winners receive cash prizes and an opportunity to be displayed at our lovely partner, the Colorado Road Museum. If you want to learn about how to submit, you can do so on our website. The center runs a prolific book publishing program. Our most recent title is Rio Grande Steam Finale, which chronicles some of the final years of the Rio Grande through a spectacular visual story. You can see a preview of the book in our October webinar, which is available on our YouTube channel, and you can order the book on our publications tab on our website. Now, the CRP&A collections are the beating heart behind everything we do. We have just about 1 million items promised to our archive and a full team of archivists devoted to preserving them to industry standards. This past summer, we launched our digital collections site where users can now search freely through thousands of our digitized slides and negatives, and you can check that out at any time. That link is on our website. It's railphoto.historyit.com. And finally, we have our online events. We've been hosting these free and members-only events since April 2020, and these programs give us a chance to connect regularly with you, our members, and the larger rail fan community. Every month, we explore different themes and perspectives of rail art, photography, and history. We're excited to have you join us on our never-ending journey of new and shared discoveries. So you can check out all of our past events on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/railphotoart. And thank you again for supporting the work that we do. We are a membership-supported organization. All of the work and program we do is sustained by your enthusiasm, passion, and funding. And we are so happy to provide these member-exclusive events as a thank you for all of that support. And if you're feeling generous, maybe consider making an additional gift this holiday season to help us bring even more exciting content in the year ahead. Also, as a reminder, our membership dues run according to the calendar year. So if you haven't renewed for 2024, make sure you do so soon so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming content. And you can renew at any time on our website at that link right there on the screen. All right, so tonight we're going to take a deep dive into the collection of the renowned Jim Shaughnessy. Leading the presentation tonight is our wonderful processing archivist, Natalie Krecek. We received the Shaughnessy's material back in the fall of 2019, and Natalie has been processing this immense collection since mid-2020. With the end starting to come into sight, we are excited to present a selection of newly discovered gems, as well as some notable themes evident throughout Shaughnessy's career. Joining Natalie are two of our board members here at the center, Kevin Keefe and Jeff Brouws. Both were pivotal in the seminal work, Jim Shaughnessy, A Central Witness, which was published in 2017, and they will be sharing additional perspectives of Jim's craft and influence. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn the mic over to our presenters tonight.
So this is a look into the Jim Shaughnessy collection, and I'm not going to lie, there was really hard to make this selection for today's images. So what you're just seeing is a very small subset of a larger, wider collection. I'm happy to be going over it with Jeff and Kevin today. So a little bit of background, Haley absolutely covered that when we received the collection in the fall of 2019 and began processing it mid-2020. Obviously, getting into that, there was the pandemic challenges of working from home and coordinating all of that processing. It definitely slowed us down a little bit, but we've been picking up steam ever since. So currently in processing, we go in alphabetical order by series. We're in the midst of processing Penn Central. If anyone was curious, I know we've had some people reach out in interest of different series. So just thought I'd let you know where we're at. But we also have been expanding that online access through our CMS content management system, Odyssey, which you can find through our website as well to view all the images today. So on each image, we'll have the caption information, and then just below it, we'll have the file name. If one image you find striking, you can then find it on the CMS. We're going to be going over about 8 themes today, and these are just a few of the standouts that I've noticed while processing the collection. And they're just only some of the themes. There's so much that we could talk about within the Shaughnessy collection, but some of these really stood out to us. Today, we're going to be starting with a sense of place. All right. Let me just get my notes here. Sorry about that. All right, with the sense of place, Shaughnessy really defines each place with its own characteristics of rail photography. So different environments like the industrial location, rural settings, and cityscapes. So we have, this is Bath, New England. And each setting is unique in its own way with different features from architecture to the natural landscape. That springs to mind when we hear about those places. So there's sweeping expanses in rural areas, Colorado with wildlife and mountainous terrain. But then here we have New England with covered bridges all the way to colonial style buildings.
What strikes me about this picture, Natalie, is it's not just a railroad picture. It's just a great picture of the New England landscape. And the covered bridge is pretty classic. So is the church. And I don't know if Troy, New York, is considered part of New England. I'm not sure that it is, but certainly New England was in Jim's bones. It really was.
Yeah, I would agree, Kevin. This is really a quintessential, charming kind of New England tableau with that covered bridge and the steeple church in the background. And it's interesting to note, in talking with Jim, he really did favor the bucolic over the built up. In fact, I mean, I think his archive suggests that, there's not a whole lot of urban scenes. I think it's also interesting that Jim Boyd actually once said that the Northeast was a really rich, target-rich area for rail fans to be working in, and I think Jim really took advantage of that. Some of these towns back east are 200 years old, and there's fabulous architecture. And then, from a compositional standpoint, I really love this composition. It's got kind of a Z pattern. The tracks in the foreground, the covered bridge going across toward the middle of the photograph, and then that mountain landscape coming down from the left to the right. He was very good at just kind of seeing the entire scene for sure.
Then we have this incredible image. It's a Canadian Pacific image in Cambridge, used to be known as Galt. This is actually Orrs Lake, Ontario. That's actually just outside of Cambridge. But rural spaces were something that are present in large quantities within the Jim Shaughnessy collection. Many of these stations like this one are no longer in use or exist at all today. These images themselves really are a time capsule as evidence to the past, from our needs, goods and services changing throughout the decades. So railroads are a really great reflection of those fluctuations. There's just something really charming about this image. Even if it's simple, it really stood out to me. There's so many small towns that Jim really had been to. Just how small this little station is. It's just very beautiful with the dreamy steam just billowing away into the distance.
Well, and it shows you also just how deep and rich the railroad environment wasn't back in those days, because Orrs Lake, as you can tell, I'm not even sure in this situation or at this time in history, it was an actual municipality of any kind. And yet Orrs Lake merits a small station, a train order signal. Of course, there's obviously a siding starting right there underneath the steam engine. So just so much going on in such a small, you might think of it as an insignificant place. Of course, it's not. I wouldn't dare say that around Greg McDonald, who for many years lived not far from this spot.
Yeah, I think that Jim, again, sort of reviewing his archive, he had a special affection for Ontario and special affection for small towns. And I agree, this is really kind of a sweet shot. It seems like there's maybe the station operator is there with his son, perhaps, I guess. And this looks like a engine running light. I was kind of wondering, is that curtain, is that a curtain that is keeping the weather out from the cab there, Kevin, that's on the right there?
Yes. Yeah. I don't believe that's an all-weather cab engine, although, CP had lots of classes of engines with all-weather cabs. That's probably just a heavy canvas curtain to do whatever they could do to at least mitigate the freezing weather a little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just a wonderful everyday, slice of railroading.
And that brings us to the Denver Rio Grande Western out in Cumbres, Colorado. So Colorado, like many places, can look very different depending on where you are within the state. Shaughnessy captured a lot of nature along with documenting the railroads, very much with the floral display we have. I find that it really softens this industrial aspect of the railroading environment. It's something that surprised me within the Shaughnessy collection, because this actually appears quite frequently, where he'll have up close this lower angle of flowers at that, just with all this industrial equipment surrounding it, sometimes in yards. I really find that adds so much beauty to these grittier images at times.
That's a great point, Natalie. The flowers, I wish I knew what kind they were, are such a nice textural contrast with the big old steam engine in the background.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting too is that Jim, being an engineer, definitely was very right-brained. But I can tell you, he had a very soft side. He liked animals, he liked dogs, he liked horses, liked nature. So this is I'd never seen this image before. This is really it's sweet.
And then there's the scene of the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, a PCC car in downtown Boston. A scene like this one is really unique to places that would have these sort of PCC cars, but especially running through the heart of the city with from the automobiles to the Victorian style brownstones that are lining the streets. Not only do we get a sense of place, but we're also getting a sense of time, from the style of car to the passengers' clothing. This really stood out to me. It's very charming. It's not a scene that we see as frequently. I think you mentioned about the urban areas. Shaughnessy really tended to be out in the rural and countryside spaces. So seeing a scene like this, it really grabbed me when I saw it. And I love the shot, how the trees are kind of lining down the side of the street.
Yeah. To expand on that a little bit, Natalie. Yeah, a lot of Jim's contemporaries of that era did much of what he did. They would shoot other stuff, and that made them great. But a lot of them ignored things like city traction, and they were too busy with steam engines and other things like this. But thank goodness Jim took some time to shoot this scene. because it certainly is emblematic of a certain era. And of course, I love that Ford on the left side of the picture. If this is April 1958, I don't know what year that Ford is, but I'm guessing it's only a year or two old. It's a beautiful car.
Mhm.
The photographer Lee Friedlander once said that photography is a rich medium, and one of the great things about taking a photograph like this, even though Jim was photographing the PCC car, you get all this other information in the photograph. You get the cars, you get the buildings, you get a sense of the architecture, you get a sense of the street view, and also, as has been said, I mean, Jim, I think he had pretty egalitarian interests. So he would shoot traction, he would shoot steam, he would shoot diesel. His friend John Pickett worked for, I think, TWA. So I think even in Jim's files, you're going to find photographs of airplanes.
I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Then one of my absolute favorite shots, it's a Maine Central locomotives in Carroll, New Hampshire, for the Crawford Notch station, but also a coffee shop. Through Shaughnessy's work, like we've talked, he's been to many small towns like this one in Carroll, but there's a really charm to the station because I hadn't really seen anything that of a depot sharing with a coffee shop, this almost incorporation of everyday life. There's just people, we don't know if they're going to be boarding a train or they're just there to have coffee and watch the trains come by. I just really loved this image. There was a lot going on.
Well, and the good news is, of course, that station still stands, and you can ride there on the Conway Scenic. I was there a year ago. It's a beautiful place. The station, I believe, is yellow, painted yellow now, much brighter color than it is in this photograph. Also, notice the two, what look to be a couple of gas pumps over on the right.
Yeah.
I think I'm right about
Yeah, looks like
So
interesting.
Well, and I did a little research, and I guess the station is in the Queen Anne style, and I guess the station was built in about 1891. And it looks like to me like something H.H. Richardson might have designed. He did a lot of stations around the Northeast. But, again, getting back to the fact that Jim was an engineer, I think he also had an appreciation for architecture because it seems like he makes a conscious decision to include these buildings into the scene, and I think that's one thing that makes his work distinctive.
absolutely. I love this image. It's the National Railway of Mexico in Cotla in Mexico. It provides a sense of the industry in this time, along with like the different railroad equipment. As you can see, the type of cart is very different from the carts that we'd see at the stations in the United States. And the environment is very different from what I had seen. His capturing of the National Railway of Mexico is absolutely stunning. It's so vibrant and rich, and I just love seeing the workers. There's so much activity going on in these photographs. They have a real depth to them, from people being all over the place, like closer, and all the way to the steam engine farther away.
Yeah, some photographers might have not wanted that guy to suddenly appear in the lower right-hand corner, but I love that.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
it adds a lot of life to the photograph. This takes me back to when we did a lot of his photographs in the Essential Witness book, Jeff, and this is one of those times where I was silently getting angry at Jim because he didn't provide always a lot of information about some of these places where they were. And boy, let me tell you, it's difficult to find out precise locations from the late 1950s, early 60s in Mexico. But we got it done eventually.
Yeah. No, I think this is it's a kind of a miraculous photograph. I think as an editor, I might crop the left a little bit, and I might come in from the top just to really tighten the activity in the frame, even making it more vital. But it's great. I almost feel like maybe Jim sometimes, this is obviously made with his 2 1/4 Rolly, and I have a feeling sometimes he did make some grab shots, like he sensed something was going to happen, and it's very possible he used hyperfocal distance a lot. So he wouldn't necessarily have to focus, but he might be looking down at his viewfinder and just sense something was there, but maybe not looking through the viewfinder precisely. Because another photographer might have moved the frame over to the right a little bit to get the fellow going into the into the combine there or whatever. But regardless, it's a wonderful image.
And that he absolutely would cover in spans. Like you're right. He moves around. He
Yeah.
took a lot of various angles.
I'm just curious, are there other frames with this, or is this kind of a standalone?
He would take this is a standalone, but he would capture different activity around. So sometimes it would just be the locomotive with the rail cars. Then people would be coming in, but all the activity was constantly changing. He wouldn't always get too many of the. Occasionally, he'd get some of the same scenes with the same people, maybe doing the same activity, like loading ice. But in this particular instance here, he did not take too many of this particular scene. It would be really interesting to see. I would have liked that as well.
Yeah.
And this image, what I love, this is where we have finally the country, truly the country here. We have, depending on where you are, you have spaces like this, but where are you going to get a field of cows across from the station with this lone milk can waiting for the local train to come pick it up in Black River, New York? I found this absolutely charming. Shaughnessy did capture animals, but when they do come up, it's just occasionally. I really love it. He seemed to have an affinity for cows and horses in particular.
Yeah, well, and I love this too because it kind of proves a cliche. I mean, if there ever was a cliche about New England railroading, it was the local train being loaded up with milk cans, and cows not very far away. But I love this because it just proves what an everyday reality this really was. It was just part of the economy. It wasn't just a picture postcard New England myth, MYTH. It was part of everyday life in the most real sense. And it's great that there's only a single milk can there. It's almost cooler to see just the one milk can rather than 5 or 6 of them stacked up there. Yeah, really makes its point.
And that the railroad would actually stop to pick that one can up.
Yeah,
kind of amazing.
Which probably proves why some of the railroads ended up going out of business. But
well, anyway, this is also kind of another wonderful, New England landscape. And speaking of landscape, when I was interviewing Jim in 2007 for the Call of Trains, he mentioned that actually he was a big fan of Ansel Adams, and that Ansel Adams' work in the West, got him thinking about trying to include larger landscapes in his photographs. And even though this is more of a quiet landscape and it's not the Grand Tetons or something, it is suggestive of the fact that Jim again, pulled back, got more of the scene in there, and he, again, was attuned to nature and how the railroad fit into that scheme.
And we're moving to our next theme, sensation of movement. I think this really speaks for itself. It's going to be very representative within our images. Shaughnessy really, he seemed captured by, through his work, I've seen it very representative of things caught in motion between trains, workers, animals. He caught a variety, and it's just very striking in like an image like this of 2 lanterns inside of a car at Troy Union Depot at night. What I found really interesting about this image, it truly stood out to me, focusing on something. Normally he'd focus on logos of specific equipment, but these lanterns were a first, nestled into the snow as this storm is raging on, these blurred flurries in motion, the frozen ice down the sides of the car. It really brings so much life to this one moment of time that he captured, and it almost makes you feel cold. But this light is truly comforting in this darkness.
Jim was pretty fearless during the winter time, and I can think of a number of his photographs that, like you say, Natalie, make you feel cold just looking at them. But this one really strikes me just because of the simplicity of it, and of course it's very important to follow the instructions on the sign there. Watch your step, given how slippery everything must have been that day.
Yeah, this is a really, I think it's kind of a very unusual image for Jim, but it has a real, sweetness to it. Troy really was his was sort of his mecca. I mean, you know, he went to RIP, and RIP looked down on the Union Station, so he would come down the stairs every, you know, when he was going to school, and he'd have to cross the tracks, and so he became very familiar. And it's even though I said earlier that he, you know, really doesn't have many urban photographs, in Troy he really, I mean, you could do it, you could probably easily pull a book together of just his Troy photographs. So I have to think that, you know, maybe he might have been thinking this might have been a photograph that was part of a series about Troy,
Hmm.
perhaps, you know, something like that. Because it's well, anyway, I just think it's a really charming image.
Absolutely. And we have this image of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad near Galesburg, Illinois, in 1956. Shaughnessy really would use trains specifically to capture movement. The snow itself is just such a great element for demonstrating that action. The billowing smoke also being blurred as it's racing forward. And also Shaughnessy really had a style for racing beside the train. Many shots we'll see, also some later on where he's in a car, but that was a heavy theme that appears throughout the processing this collection.
Do we know, Natalie, whether or not he was in the back seat with one of his buddies driving, or
I
is
don't think we could say for sure.
I think he was. I think he was.
Okay, let's hope so. Anyway, it's a fantastic picture. And being a steam freak, I cannot let this photo go without you know, remarking on that fantastic '05 class Burlington 484, which was, you know, one of the great steam engines of all time, at least in the Midwest. And also note that this was a rather famous series of pictures he took and made a point of going out there because the Burlington brought some of these engines back briefly when there was a traffic surge.
Yeah, Jim liked to call these pacing shots. He kind of thought of them as participatory photography, meaning that it really gave the viewer the feeling of being right there with the photographer taking the photo. And according to Jim, these pacing shots were a two-man operation. A lot of times he was either out with John Pickett or oh gosh, I'm going to draw a blank on some of the other names that he was with, but so he loved doing these kind of photographs. And while Jim was normally pretty conservative with his film, I believe I made a note when going through his file that he actually consumed about 10 sheets of 4x5 film to get the shot that he was after. So he was he was determined, and he made a masterpiece. You know, he got it.
And that's why we're digitizing by selection. He has such a breadth of this specific shot. He got so many along its journey that finding the gem amongst the other blurrier images that didn't quite turn out just the way he wanted. But this one absolutely was a standout.
Yeah, it is.
I should mention too, this photograph ran several years ago in Classic Trains magazine. So the editor of Classic Trains, whoever that was, had good taste. Had good taste.
All right. So we're here in Chama, New Mexico. He often would capture horses running near the trains or by the tracks. What I thought was interesting about this image that it's not so much about you have the train just off to the side, but the horses are kind of blurring the distance the focus is almost to the train, the locomotive itself. But it's also very cool to see the details in Colorado. If you haven't been there, like myself, like I was very surprised to see things like that snowplow off into the distance, but it reappears frequently in his images of Colorado. But I just thought it was such a beautiful scene with these horses running through the dust and kicking it up. But it almost emphasizes the locomotive even more.
Yes, and also shows how the railroad was in an environment that's very unusual to a lot of people. I mean, that's probably a fairly routine thing for a bunch of horses to cross the track. Most places in America, that would be something that you would never see, but it was part of, I'm guessing, the everyday economic life of Chama, and wonderful that he got it, that he got it on film.
Well, yeah, the railroad moved a lot of livestock, right? Cattle and horses and everything else. I kind of wonder. I was trying to put myself in the mindset of Jim at this moment, and I'm wondering if this is almost I'm wondering if he wishes he were on the other side of the horses shooting back at the locomotive. But um, I'm also thinking that this would make a beautiful 30 by 40 where you could, really see what's happening in the background, because I think that relationship between the background and the foreground is important.
And then we also have train orders being picked up. I think this is a really special image because we have a few of other images that appear not as frequently as I would like in particular, because they're just absolutely fascinating images seeing this, in action. But this one we can really see like from a whole different perspective. Normally in Jim's photographs, we see almost from the perspective of we're viewing it far away, whereas we're actually behind the worker right now holding up the train order, and it's just between the wheels blurring and running by and whipping his coat back, and just you can almost feel the train itself and like approaching.
Yeah, I found this to be really remarkable because of the perilous, what seems to me a perilous position this guy's in. He's clearly the operator. This is an interlocking with the Rock Island Railroad, which is crossing there. Just and the caboose is clattering over the diamond now, but the guy's perched out on there on what must be a rather slippery plank.
Yep.
And holding up the train order hoop while the conductor or brakeman is prepared to reach out and grab it, and very dramatic. And I think the breeze of the train is picking up the guy's coat as well. So that's a great picture.
It is a great picture. Again, I think this feels like one of those participatory images. I mean, you feel like you're right there standing with the operator. And, it's interesting to note that, in the 50s, I think life around the railroad was a little more casual for photographers because Jim's standing in the gauge 6 feet from a very fast moving freight train. And what's interesting, two things, and I'll talk about this more a little later in the talk, but notice how those railroaders are almost anonymous. We don't see the gentleman's face. We can barely make out the conductor. And this is a motif that occurs a lot in his work. And like I said, I'll talk about that a little later. But the other thing I like about this image is that, another photographer might have waited for the conductor to hit the I'm sorry, what do you call it, Kevin? Grab the orders.
Grab the orders on
grab the orders. And to me, so that might be considered like the decisive moment. What I like about this one is that it's an anticipatory moment. You can sense that it's about to happen, and I think that that's equally exciting. I mean, it's a great image.
I love the buildup. You're right, anticipatory. That's a great way of describing it.
Yeah.
And we're moving to our next theme about the intersectionality of people in the Industrial Railroad environment. Everyone has such an independent lens in which they experience aspects of life that shape our perspective of the world around us. That can also be said for how we all experience the industrial environment, from those who run and care for the locomotives to the passenger's viewpoint, all the way to those who have a passion for the world of railroading and photograph it. And there are photographs like some of these within the Shaughnessy collection that represent only just a handful of those kind of experiences. So we have a view of engineer Frank Bunker in the cab of a Canadian Pacific Railway image. And it was traveling from Guelph Junction to Orrs Lake in Ontario. A view like this, honestly, only, at least from my perspective, only some lucky few have been inside the cab, especially be able to photograph it with an engineer at work. Shaughnessy has a handful of images inside steam locomotive cabs. What I find interesting are the engineers in the industrial space. Especially when they're actively in action, so they're covered in grease and soot, and it kind of gives you an idea of what their conditions would be like. But I also love how there's this like darkness inside the cab, and from the light coming in outside, it obscures so much, but it just illuminates the engineer.
It's a great illustration of what it took not only to run trains then, but in particular to run steam engines. I love how much paperwork is stuffed into his side pocket of his overalls, which must include more than just an employee timetable. There must be some other sorts of train orders or rule book in there. I don't know. But you see the throttle right in his face, and you can see the reverse mechanism so that he's reaching over toward the main steam gauge over on the left in the middle of the photograph. It gives you an idea of how many things were going on at any given moment when somebody was running a steam locomotive.
Yeah, the other one of the things that's interesting about this image, or I mean, a lot of these images, is that this was made with Jim's Rolly, and I think it gave him a little more flexibility than the 4x5. You know, it dawns on me just looking at all the photographs that we're going to look at tonight. I think Jim really had a deep respect for the labor force of the railroad, and because the workers come up time and time again, and they're not always positioned as being heroic, but they're they're just everyday workmen, and I think that there's something heroic about that. And like I said, well, and again, notice here that we can barely make out the gentleman's face. It's not really a portrait of him; it's a portrait of an engineer, right?
Of a type, yeah.
Of a type, of an archetype. And I think that actually, when we look at these images tonight, you'll see that it's about an archetype, you know, and that's kind of an interesting position, I think.
I love this image of the Canadian Pacific diesel locomotive passing through, especially with the kids waving at the train passing by. It adds a friendliness to this moment that isn't unusual to maybe, I mean, I see it all the time when people are like a train's passing by, but there's not a lot of images like this within the Shaughnessy collection, but there's a simplicity of this interaction that adds a real human aspect that we do see in the day to day. It's also something I feel like we kind of all share. It's like, I know I waved at a big boy when it passed by.
Yeah. Yeah, this is almost achingly picturesque to me.
Yeah.
The kids and the families and the moms or the parents certainly add a lot of charm to it. I love it's a mixed train, appears to be, to me, a mixed train, because it looks like there's a coach there after what I take to be an auxiliary water tender from an old steam locomotive. I don't know why that would be used there. And then you see is that a cemetery in the background on the right side?
Yep.
Yeah.
It is.
Wow. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It is kind of obscured by the fact of like the scene before us. It takes almost deeper detail,
Yeah.
like of looking at those details.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of an interesting composition if you think about the kids in the foreground to the left and the upright little tombstones off to the right, and the kids off to the left. I mean, they kind of balance each other out. But compositionally, Jim was never really one to crowd the frame with a train. In fact, more often than not, he pulled back and for a more expansive view, what our friend Greg McDonald has called the environmental view. And because I think he knew instinctively that what was happening around the train had an equal pictorial weight. And in doing so, I think, it makes the photograph more interesting. And this is a wonderful example of that.
And this is by far one of my favorite station images that Shaughnessy has taken. It's a view inside of the passenger station of Canadian Pacific's Windsor Street Station. Away from like the more grittier industrial side of railroading, we have spaces like this one. It's kind of that middleman that facilitates the travel of where it's bright, clean. It offers all these different types of services. I think the station itself is very unique because it actually has, a statue art all the way down at the end. And each, I do occasionally see in some of Jim's photographs of stations, something that makes the station very unique to a very specific place, whether it's local art that actually incorporates elements of the town that it's in. This one is just stand out with the beams and the clocks creating this line down the center.
Yeah, I had never seen this space. I don't believe before. I took a train into Montreal once, and I don't remember if I got up into this concourse or not, but this picture really struck me. It's a gorgeous concourse. It's different than any other concourse I've seen, but it also sent me to doing some research. And the good news is this space still exists. Unfortunately, in my mind, it's not a train station anymore. The space and the building has been preserved for other purposes. And I think I read that the concourse here is now rentable as a entertainment space. But That's better than the alternative, right?
Yeah. Well, this, yeah, I was really struck with this image too, and I think it's kind of unique in his archive. What I seem to recall is it's funny, he did. I'm going to go tangentially here a minute, but he photographed in New York City one time. He went down there to photograph the High Line, and there are those images with the New York skyline in the background. But I don't remember, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, but I don't ever remember seeing any interior photographs of Grand Central Station. And it seems to me that Jim was kind of more aligned, getting back into that worker mode. I think he was more aligned to getting into the gritty spaces of the working environment. Like David Plowden obviously photographed a lot of station interiors, but I don't think that was Jim's interest. Perhaps, I don't know, but anyway, regardless, I mean, this is a very interesting image, and it's kind of a unique one in his archive.
Yeah, when it came to stations, it makes sense what you said a lot, that he was an engineer. He was typically outside of the stations and many different aspects, and sometimes on top of part of them.
Yes.
There's one image where he's like on the ledge of a building, and it makes me very uncomfortable every time I see it. So
yeah. So I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't recall seeing a lot of interior depots necessarily, except for the telegrapher's bay or something like that, CTC board.
then we have a very interesting, I find these images very interesting. It's covering an industrial space. Another aspect of railroading was all the work that was happening in these offices, towers, and stations that go to coordinate all these trains and locomotives between them and sending all these messages.
Yeah, knowing Jim as well as I didn't know him nearly as well as you, Jeff, but I did get to know him a little bit, and I'm sure from our discussions and conversations when I visited him that this kind of picture struck him just for the sheer volume of stuff going on that sort of define what this guy has to do for a living. This is of course a bygone era. There's a lot of paper involved, the old wooden desk, the old wooden chair. I love the pistol grip levers that he appears to have in front of him that I'm judging must control the train order semaphore outside. Very much a manual world that he was in. It's really fascinating.
Jim told me, or I mean, I did see in his archive that he did occasional industrial photography. And as I said earlier, you'll notice in a lot of his images of the railroaders, people working in the railroad environment, that he has their faces obscured or turned away. And he did this for two reasons. One, he didn't want to get the employee in trouble. And secondly, by depersonalizing the images and making it more of an archetype, as we said, he felt that it could potentially be used in a stock photo situation. Because, if you look at this image, we can't really say it's on the Canadian Pacific or it's on the Canadian National or where it is necessarily. And I think that he was interested in getting published, and I don't recall exactly, but I know that he did have articles, and he had some illustrations go into Railway Age and some other magazines besides Trains and Railroad.
We also have images like this one, and you talked about he's more likely to be seen in a shop than he is in a station.
Right.
I love this image of a worker in a shop doing like many jobs, just needed to maintain the locomotives. We see a lot of work and care that goes into keeping them running, but cleaning them was also another level of care that went into that. What I really love about this image is in particular is the glistening paint at the front of the locomotive, and it just adds so much grandness to its presence.
Mm-hmm. And it's a reminder that washing locomotives at one time was very much a manual process. I mean, by this time, by 1955, there were certainly locomotive washers out there, but that didn't mean that there weren't instances where roundhouse workers like this guy had to get out there with a pail and a mop and do the job by hand. And I'm guessing, given that he's a CP employee, that he did this with a certain amount of pride.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that's really wonderful about all these images is the access that Jim had. And I sense that, you know him, Kevin, and I knew him fairly well. he
Yeah,
was a very self-effacing guy, and I have a feeling
yeah,
that, he could really kind of talk himself into these situations. And, we all remember back in the 60s, and, that a lot of times being around a railroad environment, the employee might say, hey, just watch out for the guys in the white hats and take some pictures and be careful, but he just seemed to, I think he developed a rapport with these railroaders, and I think that comes across in the photographs.
I love this image. It's a Penn Central auto train passing near Chatham, Center, New York. Um, there's just something about the ice skaters that are so engrossed with the skating on their local frozen pond that the train really disappears and becomes part of the environment and the everyday. I think it's a really good example of the railroad environment working alongside us. And honestly, it almost kind of, almost don't even notice it, but you do. It's just, we see these ice skaters, and the auto train is just part of every day.
yeah. It's a wonderful little pastiche. I'm the skaters are a wonderful thing to see, but also the train. The train is great. I don't know if there were some other pictures, Natalie. Maybe you can address this that showed the locomotive, some other part of the train. I think it's interesting that this picture just shows a piece of the train, not the front, not the back, but the middle of the train. And also, of course, I can't help but remark on the fact that automobiles and new cars and automobiles were were transported around with absolutely no coverings on them at all.
Yeah, I almost feel like maybe Jim was making a Christmas card here. I mean, it's got a very
Yeah,
quaint feel about it. And I did a little research, and I guess this pond was 35 miles east of Albany, so he must have been been along the B&A. And I wonder whether he knew about this place and had seen skaters previously, or whether he just stumbled upon it and made the image.
yeah,
But it's a great shot. It's a really great shot.
yep.
And to address your question, Kevin, this image kind of was separated from others. I think there was maybe one other image, but I can't recall it. I think it was still just the auto train, the middle of the cars. It wasn't.
Well, I like that. That's different because a lot of fans, and I'm not saying this critically, but they would have shot the train so that the locomotives were, assuming this train is running left or right, let's just say that they would have shot the locomotives just to the left of those birch trees over on the right side of the pond, unobscured. And apparently, Jim thought, well, I don't care about that. I want to get the train,
Well, again, it could have had some stock photography applications, right?
Yeah, good point.
You know.
And Jim also captured the railfan community themselves. So scenes like this one may seem kind of familiar. Crowds of railfans, cameras in hands, capturing photos of an excursion. Shaughnessy captured many outings, always in various different perspectives, but showing the community coming together. And in some images, we see families. It's almost like sharing a passion with those in your lives. And for some, it's like a passion that could span like generations from parent to child. It's a very endearing scene, seeing kids just as excited to be a part of the experience in a lot of the images. There's quite a few within the collection.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remark on the occasion as well here, because this was when the D&H refurbished and made a big deal out of running these PA diesels that used to be on the Santa Fe. And Jim very much became kind of the quote unquote official house photographer of the D&H PAs. He shot them in the shop. He shot them out on the road. He was Jim Shaughnessy to these engines was kind of like what Don Wood was to the nickel plate 759 a few years earlier. And the best pictures of the D&H PAs are the ones that he took, I think.
Well, I did a little research, and I guess after Jim's book came out on the D&H in 1967, the D&H's president, Bruce Swirling, really kind of gave Jim the keys to the kingdom. And Jim was able to, request where a train might be. I mean, there's another shot here that we don't have in our presentation tonight, but there's another shot here of the PAs with another train atop the Staruka Viaduct there. And, as you said, Kevin, I mean, I guess Jim was Yeah, I mean, he was the D&H's photographer, and to the point that they considered him as their official historian, and
Hmm.
I think he felt quite honored by that.
And I believe he became friends with Sturzing as well over the years, which wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't be also I also wouldn't be surprised if some of our participants tonight, and they might chime in if it's the case, are in that photograph, because these were relatively famous fan trips at the time. A lot of people made the journey out there to see these things.
We have next this really wonderful image. It's one of my favorites of inside this interlocking tower. From the view of the levers and the board, it's a elongated angle skewing our perspective of this scene. And the levers are almost like an instrument to the board's chaotic lines that I thought kind of looked very much like sheet music in appearance, while the workers they orchestrate this flow of traffic so beautifully. It's just a striking image. There's not as many quite like this one in the Shaughnessy collection, so it really stood out to me.
That's an interesting way to look at it, Natalie. Yeah, I love the galoshes. I think those are galoshes at the bottom there too, to throw onto your feet in the wintertime, to go out there and unclog some switches or whatever.
I mean, it does really look like an industrial scene from the 1930s. It almost looks like a Lewis Hine photograph or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny. Again, my sense here is that perhaps Jim was in industrial photographer mode, because it's interesting to note where the focus is. The focus is on on those levers, and the gentlemen in the background are out of focus. And again, perhaps this was a photograph for an illustration to be used in Railway Age about this is an interlocking tower, right, Kevin? I think.
Yeah, definitely.
But the photographically, it's got beautiful tones, and again, I love what you said, Natalie, about the relationship between the schematic on the board back there and the lines in the photograph.
We also had really interesting images. Unlike that station that we saw earlier, we see one, it's a little darker, more haunting, eerie, with the light illuminating off the sign in the corner, and we could see the passengers going out into the rain to their train. It's just I thought it was an absolute standout image, one that I don't often see with Shaughnessy.
Yeah, as a magazine person, I would have loved to have had an article about these trains and had this photograph available to me, because well, some people watching tonight would say I would be ruining the photograph, but I would make use of some of that space for a headline or something like that. It lends itself very much to be used in that kind of context.
Yeah, I love this image too, and it kind of reminds me of a film still from a Hitchcock, thriller. You feel like something dramatic is about to happen.
Yeah.
I'm also, while Jim often posed a lot of people in his photographs, what I really like about this photograph in particular is how casual it is. Jim was also very adept at not intruding in things, and there's just a naturalism to the photograph that and we saw that naturalism in the shot from the station in Montreal too. And again, photographically, it's just wonderful that there's that, this mode of light hitting the board on the right hand side there, defining where this train's going to go, and then the outside, this little triangle above the train. Really beautiful, combination of light and dark.
That's really well said. One of I feel like I'm going to say that about every image. That is one of my favorites. But a worker in a shop that really provides a scale of how large and grand these locomotives are in comparison to the humans who run them. The image overall is simple, with this worker just standing in a shop, but it's the smooth lines of the metal of the face of the locomotive, whereas the worker's face is kind of cast in shadow. It just, despite it almost humbles him and makes him seem fragile, despite the strength that needed to operate and run and maintain these locomotives.
This photograph to me is an important one too, because it shows the role Jim played in, I don't know if the right word is romanticizing, but certainly romanticizing the diesel, because a lot of photographers in the early 50s began walking away from the whole railroad photography game when the steam engine was disappearing. And I was 3 years old then, so I never heard this, but I imagine what they would have been saying was all the romance and drama was being bled out of railroading by the diesel. And of course, this photograph puts the lie to that. I mean, this is a beautifully lyrical photograph, beautiful lyrical photograph. And so what if they're diesels? They're still beautiful.
Yeah, I'm right there with both of you. I mean, I think this photograph has a lot of quiet power. I think it's very mysterious. I like the scale aspect between, you know, the worker and, again, an anonymous worker in a shop area. And it just dawned on me, this almost looks like an Otto Kuhler etching, you know, in the sense that Kuhler, you know, emphasized in his etchings that, you know, that relationship between, you know, the small human being and this large locomotive, and the light, you know, the light coming in from the left here is just kind of it's almost ecclesiastical, you know, in a way.
Absolutely. And this is a really fun image. So when it comes to like the railroad and industrial spaces, one doesn't often associate it with seeing a rest, someone taking a break. It's very occasional, and not often do we see in Shaughnessy's collection coffee breaks in the cab. It's just, there's a small handful of them, and typically they're really far away, but this one is right up close in the moment. We do have some other images where some other workers from the same series are taking a break underneath a tree beside the tracks, near the Brouws siding. But this one in particular, I just really love the calm and quiet with the thermos at their feet.
Yeah.
I'm guessing because he did so much photography around those sidings east of Roanoke that this guy, maybe the engineer, maybe the fireman, I'm not sure, but he's in the crew of a Y6B articulated. And you can't really tell, I guess, from this photograph, but for all its immensity, the cabs on the Norfolk and Western articulated engines were extremely small and cramped. And I like the way this guy is perched on the edge of the where the engineer's seat would be on the right side, and his feet stick right out onto the gangway, and not a lot of maneuvering room.
Well, I like this image a lot too, and I like the fact that it's you know, it's just kind of a snapshot of just an everyday moment where the guy's having a cup of coffee. And I guess is he reading a flimsy there, Kevin? Maybe, or
I'm trying to look at it more closely. It's probably train orders, but
yeah,
it's hard to tell.
yeah. But the other thing that's so great, again, you know, talking about Jim sort of being an invisible presence. I mean, you don't feel the sense of the photographer in this image. You know, it's a very natural thing, and so I just like the fact that obviously, however Jim was with these railroaders, they felt very comfortable around him. And also, you know, when's the last time we saw a thermos?
Right.
It's been a while.
And what appears to be a China coffee cup on the floor.
Maybe
enamel.
Yeah, something like that. It's 1958. I don't think it's plastic. Yeah. Wow.
Well, that kind of leads us into our next theme, is the changing of the railroad environment. I think that kind of speaks for in our image here of a Canadian Pacific Railway steam locomotive. Images like this, you know, is not something that we would see much anymore today, with diesel being the main power. But there's just something absolutely stunning about the steam billowing far into the distance as it roars across the tracks.
Yeah, what a fabulous picture of a fabulous place, which I've seen before, and yeah, this is just a great picture of and this bridge still stands, fortunately.
You guys have said it all. We can go to the next image.
Yes, this is a really striking image, very unusual, especially with somebody standing, maybe a station agent. But there was a time like when information had to be written down in many capacities, and that's not really anything that we see in use today. It's now streamlined by technology, losing that very human touch of somebody handwriting in chalk on the board for the schedule and times. I think that makes that really special in this image.
Yeah, what a wonderful snapshot of what life was like in 1961. The steam heat obviously still holds sway on the passenger train, so that you get the fabulous romantic wisps of steam on the platform, and that really cool, those couple of those cool posters about Broadway and what's going on Broadway. And I love the fact that this is the Lake Cities, the Erie's train, the Lake Cities, which certainly wasn't the glamorous way to get from the East Coast to Chicago. It was a kind of a secondary train. No offense to Erie fans.
Well, I think, as I said, Jim's friend John Pickett worked for TWA and out of Philadelphia, I think. And if I'm correct, if any of you have a copy of Night Train, the book that Jim did with Don Duke, this picture appears in it, and then there's a whole nother series of that Jim took inside the car with Carol, his wife, and Jim and John Pickett reading some newspapers and everything. So he, clearly he might have had a story in mind, because there were 4 or 5 or 6 pictures that kind of went along with this one. Yeah.
I love this image of Long Island Railroad at Port Jefferson. It really, between the paint schemes of the locomotive, really stood out, especially with how the numbers themselves are outlined and really added dimension I haven't seen on other locomotives, along with the advertisements really setting a time and place. But there's another image of this station as well, and just behind where the conductor is actually is a phone booth. And I thought that was just an added charm to the image. I wish it was incorporated in this one as well. It is a little obscured, but there is another one. But the locomotive is just framed so beautifully, especially to display the lettering.
Yeah, and that was a rare, kind of a rare, model of locomotive. And I love the Alka-Seltzer ad. There's still Alka-Seltzer, isn't there? Do they still make it? I assume they do.
I think so.
Okay.
Again, looking at this, you can spend a lot of time looking at this, because there's a lot of railroad landscape furniture around the train. The advertisements, the station in the background, the car, behind the station. What's interesting is that Jim could have. I think he was intentional here. I think he wanted to include those elements, because he could have stepped, to the right and essentially eliminated some of the signage, some of the depot, and just gotten the more of a 3/4 view of the locomotive and the train. And he decided not to do that. And it's actually a very interesting composition. It's a very interesting composition.
Leads us to our next Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority streetcar. I love this night shot with the worker standing very poised with their coin dispenser on their hip. So in a world of Metro cards and train tickets online and using our phone to pay to get to board these trains, we are very far removed from a scene like this. And it moves a level of interaction that we just don't get anymore.
Yeah.
Harvard, my goodness. Yeah. And then look at the older streetcar, which I take to be an older streetcar, across the platform in the distance. Nice contrast with the PCC car.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Natalie. I mean, I think I guess, what would we call him? The motorman. The motorman,
yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that coin changer. I mean, I remember those from my youth. Anyway, it's a nice little tableau.
And this is a really nice image of a New York Central worker sitting at their desk. And this really brings to mind that, again, with computers and devices, gone are the days of typewriters, the teletypes, the telegraph machines, and the corded phones, which were really common during this time period. And we see all these elements represented in many of different office shots that Shaughnessy captured.
Yeah, and the clock. The phone just beyond his face on the retractable, what do you call it, the accordion extender. That just shows you how much these guys had to deal with on separate devices when they were just trying to make sure the railroad, operated smoothly.
Well, again, compositionally, I really like how Jim oftentimes lets the clutter in the frame be the shot, itself without trying to direct or orchestrate anything too much. I mean, another photographer might have gone in and tried to clean that up a little bit, or, coax the operator to pose this way or that, but he just let it be, and I think that there's a term that Walker Evans used called authorial presence. And Walker Evans really wanted to take photographs that had no authorial presence. You didn't want to feel the presence of the photographer. And again, I've said that previously, but Jim was really adept at that. And you notice again here the operator's face is obscured. It's not really a portrait of him, not a portrait of him. It's a portrait of the setting, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Similar in some vein as this one as well. And I left this one as Shaughnessy shot it. I mean, I was almost tempted to straighten it out, but then I lost a lot of the different aspects of the image itself. I love the view down the levers all the way to the stove. These are, again, elements that of a time gone by. I think there's like a corded phone in the distance. It's a really lovely scene.
There's a lantern back there on the wall. I like the fact that it's canted in the direction that it is. It's it's a little dizzying perhaps, but to me it implies kind of the calm before the storm, because these guys would work on those towers for long periods where nothing was going on, and then all of a sudden everything was hitting the fan at once. And I think that this kind of angle, I don't know, somehow telegraphs that for me.
Well, it's funny, Natalie. I think when we were, reviewing the material a couple of weeks ago, there was we had a discussion about whether, Jim purposely tilted this. And at first I thought maybe it was just the fact that he's using a 4x5 on a tripod and it's a little hard to get everything lined up. But I think now it was intentional. I mean, I like the way that the cant matches the cant of the levers, and just for everybody's information, this was a friend of Jim's. This is Curtis Law, who was a tower operator. And as was Jim's modus operandi, usually in these situations, he'd make 3 or 4 different images, different poses. And if you want to pull out your copy of Essential, if you pull out your copy of Essential Witness, another variation on this image is on page 35.
I'm going there right now.
And we have our other theme of changing perspectives. So this really captures all the different, just like what we saw before, the different angles of these images that can really shape how we're viewing them. Very much like with this CBQ image in Zering, Illinois. What I really love about this image is this, I think appears in the book is called a bug's eye view angle. It's the feature that appears a lot within the collection, this low angle that brings the focus of the approaching subject while also enlarging the tracks. The effect of the perspective really guides our eye directly to the subject. And I just found it really, really gripping of an image.
Yeah, to return to what I was saying earlier about these particular engines too, a lot of people shot the Burlington 484s. But these couple of visits that Jim made produced what are, to me, the most wonderful photographs of that class of engines ever taken, because he wasn't, that's like we've been saying all night, he wasn't taking the usual photograph. He was doing unusual stuff with it. And I love the anticipatory feeling of this particular picture. You can tell the smoke, the engine isn't moving, but of course he would never have taken it if it was.
Right.
But it's a great, and all this whole series of stuff in Zering and Galva and a couple other places is just fantastic.
Yeah, you got to think about it. Jim was born in 1933, so he's 23 years old taking this photograph. He's been subjected to Trains magazine. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, he's been looking at Trains magazine probably since about 1952. And, he's one of the young bucks. I mean, he's out there. He wants to get published. He wants to do different things. He wants to try different things. And, for several years, when Phil Hastings lived in in New York, they were travel buddies, and I think they really influenced one another. And I think that, in a way, Hastings, I think they both freed each other up visually. I think they were taking chances, and this is a wonderful example of that.
In a similar vein, we have another rail sort of shot. Now, what I love about this one is that we're set right on the rail as it wraps around to all this activity at the station itself. And then we can kind of take in everything going on from that, the locomotive with the really bright headlight, the steam dissipating, and then we can see the worker filling the back of the other locomotive.
Yeah, this is really a masterful picture.
Yeah.
Not much more I can say other than wow. I mean, he really was in command of the idiom with this example right here.
Yeah, no, he was having a hot streak here for sure, in terms of the great work he was doing. And what I said about the previous one sort of goes with this one too. But the other thing I like about it is, again, it was a really gamey exposure. This is at the gloaming. I mean, it's after sunset, So, and Jim handheld everything pretty much except for the night stuff. So he had I would imagine he was resting the camera on the railhead and snapped the shutter, So
yeah.
In a similar vein, we have this beautiful light coming in and illuminating the wheels and the driving rods. And this is in Three Rivers in Quebec. Just a stunning shot that normally we typically get the whole locomotive or maybe a side profile. But I just thought this was a really standout of the details of the locomotives themselves, a little more up close.
Yeah, very much so. It's a great depiction of the essential architecture of a steam engine. It's about as good a picture of running gear as I've ever seen.
Yeah, Jim, once told me that he really kind of enjoyed this close proximity to locomotives, and for him, a steam locomotive, quote, was a thing of beauty, power, and purpose. And I have to think that as a civil engineer, Jim would have been, very attuned to the aesthetics of valve gears and rods. And this picture, for me anyway, is reminiscent of Charles Sheeler's famous painting from 1939 entitled Rolling Power. Whether Jim ever saw that, I don't know, but it feels like they're twins. It feels like they're brothers.
I really love this next image. It is something a little more unique. There's only a small handful of images within the collection that I've seen similar to this, but it almost feels like we're on the back of the tender itself. And it's just such a unique perspective, getting this almost aerial view projecting ahead of where the locomotive is headed. I just thought this was really special.
Yeah, I think you're right, Natalie. I think he's standing in the coal pile, which tells me that he did some interesting negotiating with the crew. And because I also feel like that exhaust almost looks like the engine isn't just sitting there anymore. He's starting to get a roll on. Not sure about that part of it, but I think he's standing up on the coal bunker. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, it is. Again, as we've been saying the last couple of slides here, Jim was really kind of seeking more unusual viewpoints, and I think he intuitively maybe felt, again, he wanted to get published, and I think intuitively he felt that Morgan was, going to be keen on seeing something unusual. But the other thing I like about this image so much is it's what's beyond the locomotive. I mean, I like the landscape out there. I like the small town feel. I mean, I like the, compositionally, I love the light and dark of the snow and the trees. And, so he's paying attention to a lot of things,
We have this next image of a nickel plate locomotive shop in Conneaut, Ohio. I really love, and I've seen the various few aerial views between a few other collections. And what I thought was unique is Shaughnessy tend to use different things as almost framing his images. And sometimes it's almost like complete obscuring our view, as almost like we're this fly on the wall sort of viewing. But I just found it really interesting, especially with the choice of having the hook directly in almost center in the frame.
Yeah. Most photographers would have moved, depending on what he's standing on, which is
right.
Probably some kind of catwalk, would have moved to the left or right to get the hook on the moving crane out of the way. But that's just such a that's so symbolic of what a steam engine shop was all about. And of course, it's a massive hook I like the photograph too because it just is a reminder of this is a late day, 1957. Not for much longer, but at this moment in time, the nickel plate was still keeping its Berkshire engines in good running form, and there are several of them there in the photograph.
You know, it dawned on me today as I was looking at this that perhaps as in Steam's waning days, where more and more photographers couldn't be out trackside taking photographs of steam locomotives going by with freight trains, they turned inward, right? So they started looking at the interior of shops, because as is the case with this one, I guess these were dead locomotives, or these were refurbished. I mean,
I think they're in the process of being overhauled with every intent to continue to use them. If they'd been retired, they wouldn't be in the shop on the floor anymore.
Okay, but it'd be interesting to if we could somehow see all the railroad photographs that have ever been made, to see where this shift occurred in the within rail enthusiast photography, where that shift occurred, where people started going inside to look at things. And anyway, just a thought.
Yeah.
And we're moving to our next theme of transitional spaces. So Shaughnessy's style of photography really has emerged through thousands of his photographs I've seen within the collection. But one that really stood out to me as unique was his use of framing a shot through these transitional spaces. So by transitional space, I mean a space that is designed to exist between two other spaces to provide a connective bridge based on the requirements and function of those spaces. So a few examples are staircases, doorways, windows, hallways and bridges, and even garden paths. More simply, a space that allows you to move between those two spaces. So are demonstrated by our next image here. So what we had kind of been talking about earlier of Shaughnessy being in the car. I know he also, another person he traveled with a lot was Sandy Worthing in Canada. But so in an image like this, an all too familiar sight of a train passing by, but being in a vehicle, but there's that separation between us and the subject. There's something that very intimate about an image like this.
Yeah, I wish I could identify what kind of car it is. It almost looks in this photograph like they'd been chasing it, and then they'd kind of run out of road.
Yeah.
So this is their last shot of the train as it pulls away from them, because it looks like there's a body of water in front of them.
Well, with several of these pictures, being able to show the piece of the car was, a way to make reference as to how they were taking the photographs, to emphasize that it was a car chase and to put the viewer into the experience with them. And I think, that, and we've all been there. We've all chased trains this way, and these are really delightful images.
And to answer your question, this is actually Sandy Worthing's Oldsmobile.
Oh, really?
1956,
yeah.
yes.
That's great.
I took a moment to download, but he spent a lot of time. I believe he was a editor of the Canadian Rail magazine. Him and Shaughnessy had some like a friendship, it seemed, over the years. I'd seen through some of the CP Rail issues. Very interesting relationship.
Yeah, close friends. They were very close friends.
This is love this image. It's more framed using the doorway. It's very, very intriguing. And it's just so different from the other one, where again, a degree removed from the train passing by. But there's what's really interesting is I notice even like with the details, the door is unlocked. It makes you want to open it and step out and get closer. It's very inviting.
That's a great observation, Natalie. Now, we're not lucky enough to know what kind of car this is in this photo, do we? Does any notes about that?
No.
I can't help. Yeah.
The Chevrolet.
Yeah.
But very much like going into our next image here. Again, National Railway of Mexico, love these images. And here he's using a doorway of maybe one of the shops, but it obscures the rest of the space around us, really focusing in on the steam locomotive, and the worker seems to be turning it on a turntable. It just is absolutely a stunning image, especially with this darkness brought into the light.
Yeah, I've seen photographs of this roundhouse, and maybe they were Jim's photographs. This really was a relic of another time and era, probably maybe the 1880s, maybe even the 1870s. with those arched portals. But yeah, it's a great photograph, and of course, Jim often had the presence of mind to, you know, back up and get inside an interior space and shoot out into the light,
Right.
whether it's an engine facility like this or a tunnel or some other kind of place.
Well, and talking about this framing device, whether it's a train through a car window or a roundhouse uh, doorway, what's great about these is that once a photographer sort of discovers this kind of motif, we tuck it into our bag of tricks that we can use, and so you do see this. Shaughnessy used this effectively over and over. And as we'll see in the next image too. And I want to say, Kevin, this is truly an Armstrong turntable, right? Those guys are turning the locomotive themselves, right? I think.
Well, I imagine you could be. Yeah, yeah. I think it's an Armstrong. I can't say for sure, but there's a couple other pictures here in the book of the same place. But I don't think there's an operator's shack on that thing. I think he had to push it himself.
With our next image here, this is in Hagerstown, Maryland, of a view of an image through the window looking out to workers going about their business. Images like this appear somewhat rarely within the Shaughnessy collection. His use of this space to frame the subject, I just found particularly striking. Again, where we're brought inside. This window is very interesting. There's locks. It seems uneven. It's quite unusual itself as well.
It's filthy. Yeah, it's really, and there's a padlock. Yeah, there's a padlock there on the side. Wow, that's really great.
And they haven't cleaned the windows in a while.
No, yeah, right. Yeah, the guy's working on on one of NW's streamlined 482's engines. It's not one of the J's. It's much older, but it's still a beautiful picture.
Well, has been said here. Natalie stated it earlier. Jim was always really interested in the interaction and intersection between man and machine, and this really is one of the finest examples in his archive. I just love the side light. And there's this very there's a naturalism to the image in terms of this unposed. Obviously, the worker doesn't know Jim is taking the picture. It's just beautiful, and I mean graphically. I mean, if you look at the light on the wheels and the side light on the worker and the hoses and everything, it's really a wonderful composition.
Absolutely. And we would be remiss to not even discuss Jim Shaughnessy's night photography. Here is an image with him holding Night Train that Jeff was discussing earlier.
Do you want me to jump in here, Kevin, or you're going to jump in?
Yeah, I don't know much about the book. I'm checking out his socks.
Well, Jim put together this major book on night photography in 1961 for Don Duke's Golden West Publications, and it was called Night Train. And it was a really important compendium of night photography being done around the country by a bevy of photographers, including Steinheimer and Hale, Middleton, many others. And I'm very partial to it because it was one of the first books I ever checked out at the library when I was 12 years old. But the important part here is to mention is that, and I think Natalie will confirm this, about 10% of all the images that Jim made were probably night photographs. And so this was a major thing for him. I mean, he loved doing it, and I think this book was, kind of a major accomplishment. And my sense is that even though it says it's been compiled by Don Duke, I believe Jim was really the editor in terms of the photo selection and whatnot.
That's really interesting, getting all those details about the book, since we don't actually have a copy that we've been able to reference. You're definitely going to have to look into that, because his night photography is absolutely standout, as you can see in this image here, in his hometown, Troy.
I don't know that I've ever seen it in the Kalmbach Library either, not to bring up that necessarily, but there's just about everything ever published is in there. And I don't think I've ever seen that book before, which means I'm going to have to head out there this week and see.
Okay, well, are you going to comment, Kevin, or you want me to jump in?
Oh,
Or?
well, I saw this in one of the books. I think this was in the earlier book, right?
Yeah.
The Call of Trains.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I mean, what a great picture of his hometown. There's so many wonderful pictures of Troy, including in a lot of pretty lousy weather. I don't know what kind. Oh, it's snowing here. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's another winter shot. Yeah, what can you tell us about obviously it's a bit of a time exposure.
Right. Well, yeah, as we've been saying, Troy was Jim's hometown, and the downtown area especially was a favorite spot for him. And this is a really, really good example of open flash photography, which is mainly what he did. I mean, there were a few synchronized flash images in the collection, but mostly open flash. And he would usually work with one or two friends. And this is an example where he opens the shutter, fires a flash from the right-hand side here, um, and has obviously enough technical knowledge and everything to know approximately what the length of the exposure is, so that we don't get the background totally blurred out. But and these shots were usually typically about 30 seconds or 40 seconds, and yeah, I'll have more to say on the next shot. So
Yeah, there's absolutely this great balance of dark to light, especially where we can see even the lantern's path illuminated just very subtly.
yes.
Yeah, and
Well,
enough light in the sky to show the silhouette of the building and the buildings in the distance. That's really
yeah,
cool too.
yeah.
It is. I really love the silhouette we have with the two Baltimore and Ohio steam locomotives here. It just, the steam illuminating the space, it creates a very dreamy, ethereal effect to this rail yard. It's not typically something like I had seen before. There's just something very soft about it. Whereas a lot of his other images come across very industrial. There's not as much steam billowing and smoke in the distance.
And the shark nose, or at least the Baldwin diesel in the distance, is almost incidental to what's going on. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely an idiosyncratic diesel, and Jim's not paying very much attention to it.
Jim once mentioned to me that in an interview that Dick Steinheimer's photograph that was found in a 1952 issue of Trains magazine, where there were two Southern Pacific railroaders standing by a 484 in Saugus, California, was the thing that kind of gave him the inspiration to get him into night photography.
One of my absolute, again, favorites. They're all favorites. It's hard not to have one. Where this moon is hanging over overhead as a focal point, when your eye can kind of travel along the plume of steam and across the glossy body of the locomotive. There's just, I love the way it highlights the locomotive detail. It's you can see a lot of the grittiness and the texture. It's captured beautifully.
Yes, and the water columns and all is a nice little punctuation point to the photograph at the back end of the tender.
The second inspiration for Jim's night photography was, well, this is how it happened. He had a friend named Gene Baxter in Troy who was a photojournalist, and Baxter turned him on to the work of Joseph Karsh, the portrait photographer who made, you've seen those favorite portraits of Einstein and Hemingway and Churchill. And Jim saw those, and he realized that actually that this workaday railroad environment in yards and around the shops and everything could be an open air studio. And he liked the dramatic lighting of Karsh. And so again, that was, it's always interesting to me to try to trace the inspiration points that influence all of us. And so that was kind of a nice piece of information to get from Jim.
Shaughnessy would also include a mixture of these mix of candid and posed shots. This one is absolutely more posed of Paul shot master, yard master Paul Mooney, just doing his job at night. I thought this is a really standout and very iconic of his night photography work, especially including rail workers.
Yeah, Jeff, you wrote about this picture in some detail, right, in the first book, I believe.
Yeah, yes, I did. Yeah. Well, yeah, as Natalie said, this is Yardmaster Paul Mooney. And again, I think, as I said earlier, I can point out 3 or 4 other photographs that Jim made, within an hour of making this one. And I think this was to illustrate some article for Railway Age. But Paul was the yard master, but he was masquerading here as a switchman. And again, notice the anonymity of the background, lack of geographic setting. We don't know exactly where it is. So this comes across as, again, a nice industrial photograph that could have stock possibilities. Let's see, what else do I have to say? Oh, in fact, it was in terms of the stock possibilities, this Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg used this. Paul was a switchman in the Sierra Nevada in the Southern Pacific and Central Pacific book. So anyway.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's another of Paul Mooney as well, in just a different spot on the yard, elevated on a freight car. Very interesting perspective. I love the way he captures the lantern movement.
Yeah, and again, this is I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No, I just, I'm marveling at it. I was just thinking to myself, that'll do,
Yeah.
almost the classic railroader comment.
Well, again, this is a great example of time exposure and open flash, because I mean that obviously the circle of light is it's time exposure, and then he hit the flash, and because it's so dark, we don't see any ghost image of Paul. But again, I think this was utilized for a Railway Age article about the discontinuance of catwalks, maybe for brakemen. And again, to show you that Jim, when he went out to do night photography, he usually had like 4 or 5 shots in mind. And so if you pull out your book, Essential Witness, you'll see that on page 53 and 189, there's more of these images made that night.
Then we have this beautiful Norfolk and Western Railway shot of a brakeman at the Brouws siding. I found that pronunciation by someone who had interviewed some of the crew members of the Norfolk division. I really love the use of light that draws the viewer's eye to the light of the lantern in the worker's hand as they're looking up into the locomotive. And whereas the total background is all entirely obscured by the darkness, it really makes it stand out.
Yeah, it's a great reminder too that N&W steam photographed in this fashion was not the exclusive province of Mr. Link. Shaughnessy and Hastings and a few other people as well did as much with N&W, not as much, but certainly did a lot with N&W steam that's really worthwhile.
Yeah, I can't add too much there. I mean, I again, you do wonder if there was some Link influence. I just don't know. I mean, it's hard to know, because I think that book, Link's little book for the N&W night trick, came out in 1957, and this is 1957. So
I believe that the Trains magazine article had come out just ahead of this. I wouldn't be surprised if Rob McGonagall's out there somewhere, he could tell me what issue that was. But Morgan featured 6 or 8 or 10 pages of Link's photographs, and I believe it was ahead of this. So very well, it might have been an influence for Shaughnessy.
In contrast to our previous image, there is really more of a balance between the light and the dark, especially with you can see the flash bulb, somebody holding that off into the far right-hand side. There's also just something, I love the illumination of the soft light of the sky of the evening. And also the light inside the shed there at the Brouws siding. It's just absolutely a knockout image.
Really is. The night sky is really a wonderful addition to this picture, because usually it's just a black hole, and this is great.
Well, a little bit about the technical side of things. Jim, I guess he used 25B and 5B bulbs, and he decided that he didn't really like the reflectors that came with the flash. And so he concocted his own reflectors from pie plates. And because he just felt that he got a better throw of light. And you can see here, and I think he had a couple friends with him on this shot. It looks like, they fired 4 or 5 flashes off to the side of the locomotive. And then the other thing to note too, again, I just make a reference to page 128 of the Call of Trains. Then he went over to the shanty here and made a shot of a portrait of the shanty operator and just the shanty. And I think the locomotive was in the background. But again, he, with his engineering background, he was very he was very intentional. And I think also he was probably very aware of the fact that he was, taking the time of these railroaders and wanted to work as efficiently as possible. And so he brought his friends along, and he was specific about the shots that he wanted to take.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And that leads us to our next and final theme, attention to detail. This is one of my favorite sort of things in the series. It's just small things that it's when you're analyzing images by Jim Shaughnessy, you really notice different layers to the images themselves. So for example, we have our view of the Little Hoosick Tunnel, Boston and Maine. He would photograph things sometimes without locomotive or trains running in them at all. But what is absolutely beautiful about this shot is this view all the way through the line, the rails just sweeping through, illuminated through the tunnel. Just highlighting all these many aspects of railroading, not necessarily the locomotive and trains themselves.
Yeah, lots of precision in this photograph. His engineering, his engineering talent blends with his artistic talent, because he had to get in a particular position to get this photograph.
Yeah, and I guess I love this image too. It's a real pure railroad landscape, and that house in the background reminds me of something from Wuthering Heights or something from some Gothic novel. But this apparently, this image was made for an article that he did with Richard Saunders in a June 1960 issue of Trains that was specifically about tunnels. And so I guess Morgan may have sent him out on assignment on this one. But I love this shot, and you can it's still there. You can still see this today.
Another gripping image that is the only one I've seen in the Shaughnessy collection thus far is a view into an active firebox. This is not something that Shaughnessy, at least through my processing so far, has captured, just especially well in use.
It's really an artful composition. I love the symmetry of it, the butterfly doors and the stoker in the middle at the bottom, but also the way the oil can is so shiny up there above on the back head, and the steam gauges. It's really a lovely still life. It's not really a still life because the flames are hardly standing still. Great photograph though.
Yeah, I think this is evidence of Jim's real technical prowess. Can you imagine making a photograph in a very dark environment, and then you got the highlights of the fire going on in the firebox there? But it had to be a pretty tricky exposure, but he pulled it off with ease. So it is a beautiful shot.
And then these next two are going to be companions. So they're going to be in the same location. This is what I kind of called a call and response. And so I've zoomed in here, and these small details that otherwise are lost in the grander image are these little two young children waving at the locomotive as it's passing by right along the Blue Ridge. So if we go to the next one, we can see that a worker, maybe the engineer, is waving back.
He's the engineer, yeah, right.
And it tells a story that I think that we miss almost from that earlier photograph of the kids waving, because we couldn't quite see the activity of there's a relationship there of like interacting with one another. I just found that really special to see this kind of before and after moment, but you almost have to be looking for them.
Yeah, right. It's really remarkable. Wow. That's the same engine that was in the night shot at the helper on the siding. I checked the engine number.
Yeah. I'm good.
Leading to one of our last and final image here, I thought was the most charming little speeder crossing this bridge from over in Shenandoah Valley in Maryland into West Virginia. And it is almost entirely obscured by the grandness of the river beneath and the bridge itself. But there's these little details of unique railroad equipment that Shaughnessy would capture. And I just thought that it also made me laugh when I saw it, because it was just so small and and adorable as it crossed through. But it's just almost lost in the image.
Yeah, what struck me about this picture too, and if you'll forgive an aside that isn't really railroad related, but this is the precise point where Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia escaped back across the Potomac after the Battle of Antietam.
Well, you know, it kind of makes me wonder if Jim was just there and this went by, or whether maybe, I mean, could Jim have gotten a little tour of the railroad? Maybe he stepped off to take the picture here. I mean, who knows? Anyway, it's an interesting little photograph for sure.
Absolutely. All right. That
All right.
wraps up our presentation here. So I think that leads us to the Q&A portion of our presentation tonight.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you guys so much. That was stupendous. Probably one of the most active chats I've ever seen in our programs.
Oh,
And Scott and Al, we were both kind of like, we're trying to listen, but we're trying to read the chat. And it was just going back and forth. And I just thought the blend of your perspectives and discussing these photographs was just truly, truly excellent. And I think you guys did
Thank
just
you.
a phenomenal job.
Thanks,
It's
Haley.
something
Appreciate
really
that.
special.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Haley.
And especially thank you to Natalie, who put this presentation together, and
Yes.
all the work that she's done processing the Shaughnessy collection. It's just so, I think, special to hear your perspectives on this project and all these photographs that you've been working on for several years now. So we're really, really thankful for that.
That's been a privilege.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we have time for a Q&A. We're a little over already, but if anyone does have any questions for Natalie, Kevin, or Jeff, or anything regarding the Shaughnessy collection, please feel free to send us those directly at our info account. I'll just drop that in the link now. It may get lost in the sea of accolades that are coming in for our lovely presenters tonight, but that's info@railphoto-art.org. So any questions you have, just send those along and we'll be sure to forward those. Just a reminder to everyone that this event is being recorded and we'll get an email or link emailed out. We should be able to get one out next week. So we'll get that out to you guys and anyone else who registered for the program. All of our public programs are again posted on our YouTube channel. You can go back and watch all of those. This is one of our members only, as a thank you to everyone who donates to us on the annual basis. Our next online program will be on January 9th, and that will explore the historical coloring of color schemes of the New York City transit system. That will be presented by Peter Lloyd. We'll get registration information out for that real soon. And then on a more personal note, I'd just like to take this time to announce that this will be my final webinar, as I'll be departing the center at the end of the year. Hosting this series has been an absolute joy, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to each of you for taking the time to join these presentations. We've had an incredible, journey, learning experience, and I'll gently miss our time together. Moving forward, I'll be leaving you in the very capable hands of Scott and Elrond, who will be taking over the online events. And to my dedicated coworkers and board members, I extend a heartfelt thank you. These past years have been a tremendous learning experience, and I'm sincerely grateful for the support and the camaraderie, the shared successes that we've all had together. It's been a really rewarding journey, and I just can't thank you guys enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you, Haley.
So as I say
So-
goodbye, I wish the center the very best in the years ahead. To our members, your continued support is really, again, the driving force behind our growth. So thank you for inspiring us to plan even more exciting events and endeavors. Your enthusiasm really keeps us moving forward. So I'm really grateful for the role that you guys have had in our collective journey. So here's to the year ahead and the exciting future that awaits the center. So again, thank all of you.
Haley, we can't thank you enough for all of your incredible work on our behalf over the past 6.5 years. It's just been an absolute joy and privilege having you with us. And certainly these Zoom presentations and so many other things will bear your stamp on them for many years to come. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
And all the best. And again, Natalie, Jeff, Kevin, absolutely spectacular job. I was just enthralled by every word and every image. What a treat to be able to see Jim's work through all three of your eyes. That was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll be excited to get this link out to you guys next week.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Thanks again, Natalie and Kevin and everybody, Haley, Scott. It's all great. Elron.
Oh,
Congratulations.
thank you guys.
All right.
Wow.
Good night.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Night,
Thank
everyone.
you.